Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unconfirmed, the show that reveals how the marquee names in crypto are reacting to the week's top headlines and gets the inside scoop on what they see on the horizon. I'm your host, Laura Shin, a journalist with over 2 decades of experience. I started covering crypto 5 years ago, and as a senior editor at Forbes, was the first mainstream media reporter to cover cryptocurrency full-time. Unchained and Unconfirmed are now published as videos. If you're not yet subscribed to the Unchained YouTube channel, head to youtube.com/c/Unchained podcast and subscribe today. Crypto.com is waiving the 3.5% credit card fee for all crypto purchases. Download the Crypto.com app today. Join Hack Atom 5, a 2-week Cosmos virtual hackathon to hack on inter-blockchain communication and be amongst the winners of a $50,000 prize pool valued in Atom. Visit 5.hackatom.org. Today's guest is Frank Chaparro, Director of News at The Block. Welcome, Frank.
Laura, thanks so much for having me on. So great to be back.
It's great to have you. Coinbase has been a major topic of discussion this week, not only in the crypto world, but also in the wider world of tech, business, and politics. Why don't you give us a recap of what happened?
It's been a major reason for why I haven't gotten any sleep this week as well. But yeah, just basically to recap, on Sunday, Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, released a blog outlining effectively his apolitical vision or anti-social activist vision for Coinbase as a firm, a very mission-driven sort of mission for a very product-driven mission for the company, effectively. And so obviously that kind of set the crypto and tech world more broadly aflame with different perspectives on whether or not that's sort of the right course of action for a company that's so public-facing like Coinbase to take, a company that could, in many ways, drive messages of social justice and Black Lives Matter to large audiences. And so lots of debates around that, lots of coverage in mainstream and crypto media alike about, what this means for Coinbase and from a, company's perspective and from the perspective of whether or not it will result in folks leaving. And then on Tuesday, the night of the debate, literally right after the debate ended, I got an email from a source, which was basically the email that Brian Armstrong sent out to employees saying, listen, if you are uncomfortable with this new mission or the way that we sort of outlined the mission, perfectly fine. We will give you a very generous, honestly, severance package to then leave the company, which you have until next week to consider. So that was Tuesday. Wednesday, obviously, still this was in the media being talked about on Twitter and definitely being talked about at Coinbase internally in various Slack channels. And then today they had an AMA discussing this, and I'm in the process of putting out a report that's going to walk through this timeline, an AMA addressing all of the stuff that's been going on this week. And then, as you know, some of the attention has been sucked away by quote unquote rival, not necessarily a rival, BitMEX getting slapped with charges from the Department of Justice. So that's been the week in a nutshell. That's been what we've seen in a nutshell. And it's been interesting. But not necessarily unsurprising.
So you mentioned social justice and Black Lives Matter. Were those the specific social and or political issues that employees at Coinbase wanted the company to take a stand on or take action on? Or were there other issues? Because obviously we've seen with Twitter and Facebook that there's also a lot of talk in the tech world about what companies' roles are in managing misinformation. And I know Coinbase isn't in the business of misinformation, but there is a lot of talk about how tech companies, what their actions can do in terms of our democracy.
And there's a lot of talk around this election, right? Like let's not forget that we are just a few weeks away from what many would consider one of the most important elections of our generation, of many people's lifetimes, maybe. And so there is probably just as there is this sentiment at many other companies of how do we take action? How do we provide employees with the right tools to go vote, to make their voices heard, and to have an impact on this decisive election?
Wait, but so those were the issues at Coinbase, or what were specifically the ones at Coinbase?
I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if that was sort of something that was underpinning this blog that Brian felt like he needed to put out on Sunday. Now, rewinding the clock, and this is what my report gets at, this isn't an isolated thing that happened on Sunday. And if you go and wind the clock back to this summer, okay, and this was hinted at in Brian's blog, but not explicitly talked about. Back in June, there was an AMA, and you know this from covering Coinbase through your own reporting, that they have these AMAs where employees can submit questions and ask company management, senior leadership about a myriad of things, from personal preferences of ice cream. I don't know if that's ever been asked, but that could be an example. To thoughts about company product launches, to other personal and business questions alike. And so someone asked, according to several sources, a question about Brian's view on Black Lives Matter. Okay. And so that kind of resulted in him, I wouldn't say rebuffing the question, but one source described him as not necessarily knowing if the person was asking about Black Lives Matter, the movement, or Black Lives Matter, the specific organization, and kind of saying like, I'm not ready to talk about this. And so what that ended up resulting in was a walkout. In Brian's post, he describes there being new walkouts, plural. Not necessarily sure if that's because obviously we're in this decentralized working situation where none of us are in offices. So people basically, walk out, turn their computers off, and signed off for the day. So that's been brewing since June, right? This question of whether or not Coinbase should take a definitive, make a definitive statement in support of Black Lives Matter. And so next day,
just to be clear, he did tweet from his personal account.
Yes.
Oh, that's what you're going to say?
Yeah. So that next day, as a result of sort of all of this, all of this commotion, I guess, for lack of a better word, he then did go out and tweet that he definitively supports Black Lives Matter as a movement, supporting the idea that, Black lives, as a result of the state of African Americans in this country, need to sort of be recognized and uplifted to an extent. And then he had a pretty long tweet thread outlining that, and in that tweet thread as well, I think I'm not 100% sure, he mentioned the walkouts as well. So it's kind of been at least from my understanding, a long thread. Also underpinning it, like aside from the issue specifically, like there's a question or an interesting point to be made about Brian himself. And like, I'm sure you also can like speak to this given your previous coverage. In 2014, there was a Bloomberg article that described him and Fred as these Vulcan bankers, right? Like, very not the most gregarious characters that you'd come across, and very serious. And like Brian, I was talking to a source about this like basically an hour and a half ago. Brian is someone who probably like wanted to build the most used, most important product in crypto, but not run the largest, most important company in crypto. And so I think that also undergirds this like situation where I'm sure Brian is like a fairly nice guy. And like, I'm sure, his sympathy or concern about certain social justice issues could be legitimate, but he like wants to build Coinbase. Like he wants to build this company. And so,
you know what's so funny about that?
Yeah.
I have a feeling I know which source said that to you. But anyway, we'll check about that later.
We can check after the show. Yeah. But yeah, so that's basically where we're at with this. I've just been surprised, and I'm sure, I don't know how surprised I am. I am surprised that it's gotten so much attention. I think maybe because of the language of the blog and the language of the email. And apparently that's been another thing that's been discussed in the AMA today, and just generally internally, is, and this is probably not surprising, like, did we word this right? And that's obviously evident in the fact that they've changed some of the language in the post, right? So originally there was a reference made, a kind of like strange reference, some would say, to Breonna Taylor, in which they sort of talk about like the events regarding, recent events, as opposed to like, this tragedy. Someone would probably want more passionate language. And so there's been talks about whether or not the language in these two documents were appropriate. And I think it's not so much about what's going on maybe internally at Coinbase that people are reacting to, but these two, this blog post and then this email, right, which are really kind of coldly written, people might argue, right? And so that's what I'm sort of like been thinking about in these past few days.
Yeah, so in a moment, we're going to talk more about the reaction to this. But first, a quick word from the sponsors who make this show possible. How much in fees are you paying for crypto purchases? Now, Crypto.com is waiving the 3.5% credit card fee when you buy crypto. Apart from crypto purchases, you can also get a great deal on food and grocery shopping with Crypto.com. Get up to 10% back when you pay with their MCO Visa card. No card? Use the Crypto.com app to buy gift cards for up to 20% back. Download the Crypto.com app today and enjoy these offers until the end of September. Back to my conversation with Frank Chaparro. Yeah, I actually just want to call out maybe some of the quotes from the original post just to give people a sense. And, as you kind of mentioned, some people maybe weren't surprised to hear these things from Brian. And, for me, I've been interviewing Brian himself as well as people who work closely with Brian now for 5 years. And yeah, I mean, I could practically hear him saying these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but like you can, like, if you've heard this guy speak, you can totally see him saying this in a
Yeah.
non-malicious way.
Exactly. Like this was just 100% the DNA of Brian. Things like he talked about how Coinbase's mission was to build an open financial system for the world and said, for instance, like, some people interpreted the mission more broadly. And so now I'm quoting, to include all forms of equality and justice. It makes sense if you believe that economic freedom is not possible without equality for all people. Others interpreted the mission more narrowly, believing that we were trying to create infrastructure for the crypto economy and that, yes, this would create more equality of access for all people, but we weren't trying to solve all forms of inequality in the world. The narrower interpretation is how I intended the mission to be understood. And this is like Brian, from 2015 to 2016 to 2017 to 2018, 2019, and now to today. This is the same Brian. He says, quote, I don't think companies can succeed trying to do everything. Creating an open financial system for the world is already a hugely ambitious mission, and we could easily spend the next decade or two trying to move the needle on global economic freedom. He's very much I have a huge goal, and in order to make that goal happen, accomplish that, I have to focus only on that. He's famous for the headphones rule, only wearing the headphones in the office or wearing the headphones in the office. And then if you are wearing them, nobody can interrupt you, that kind of thing. But let's talk a little bit about the reaction to this. It was pretty divided. I saw Paul Graham of Y Combinator tweet, yet again, Brian Armstrong leads the way. I predict most successful companies will follow Coinbase's lead. On the other hand, Matthew Green, a cryptography professor at Johns Hopkins, tweeted, the Coinbase post genuinely makes it harder for me to recommend that my students work there. And then the most interesting one actually came from Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, who tweeted, Bitcoin, aka crypto, is direct activism against an unverifiable and exclusionary financial system which negatively affects so much of our society. Important to at least acknowledge and connect the related societal issues your customer face daily. This leaves people behind. And then he linked to the blog post.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered, what did you make of the reaction?
I think it makes sense in light of the fact that a lot of people who probably vaguely know of Coinbase don't really know that much about Brian, right? And so they don't have that context of his sort of demeanor and the way that he kind of views his role within the company and the crypto ecosystem more broadly. Like it's not even that like Brian is disinterested in issues of social justice. Like he is not someone who is even going out and talking about some of these more crypto native topics on a regular basis, like someone like, I don't know, maybe Mike Novogratz, for instance, right? Like he rarely does interviews. He rarely is sort of speaking at conferences and panels. And so to sort of like, which is maybe dissimilar from a lot of other like executives, right? Who kind of come out and say these things. So that kind of kind of made sense, or kind of what I was thinking. And I guess like a lot of it I thought was just fueled by just this broader sort of political discourse of the election coming on the horizon, and this broader push among many different companies. And I think I shared you this DM this morning. ESG has gripped markets and many companies
And
across finance.
just remind people what ESG is.
Yeah, so we're talking about like these environmental sustainability governance goals that are becoming increasingly more important, not just to investors, but to broader financial services companies. It's not just about like, okay, you're not a tobacco company anymore. It's not just about like, are you a tobacco company? Are you a gambling company? Are you, what they call a sin company? Like, you need to start like hitting the bar even higher and like passing. There was an article in the FT this morning that talked about like passing these positivity tests. Like, you need to be actively doing things. And so there's this dichotomy in the world, and I see it in my DMs and in my mentions of, is being apolitical good or is it bad? And so a lot of the tech world has kind of moved towards the direction of being just like inactive politically is sort of political in of itself and bad. And you have a similar sentiment on Wall Street, where this idea of, if you're not like contributing to the greater good, and what the greater good is, the definition is a little flimsy. It's not something that many people would say is objective, right? And so that's kind of at the heart of this controversy as well. Why aren't you taking a stand? Why aren't you being political? Whereas other people are saying this is exactly right. Some people, I tweeted this the other day. It was in the midst of all of this, so many people were giddy that Brian had did this and sort of set the line and set a tone for future founders and CEOs to kind of just like say, hey, like, I care about building, I care about creating a strong business, and let's not forget that they potentially have an IPO on the horizon. So
meaning
anyway,
that
they
they have a financial incentive to not take a stand. Is that what you're saying?
Meaning that they have a financial incentive to like focus on like building product and not like being concerned about what Brian might deem peripheral issues, because you got to hit revenues and you got to hit the expectations of the street.
Right.
So that might be playing into it as well.
So let's now talk about the offer of the exit packages for people who aren't comfortable with this apolitical stance. And as you mentioned, it's really generous. 4 months of severance for employees with less than 3 years tenure, 6 months for those who have been there more than 3 years, 6 months of COBRA, and a 7-year option exercise window. Why do you think they decided to go with something so generous and also to offer this in the first place?
This is totally my speculation. I actually haven't like talked to people inside of Coinbase about this, but there is a gentleman that they hired. So LJ Brock is the chief people officer at Coinbase. He was at Citadel Securities, the affiliated firm of Citadel, the hedge fund, or maybe he was at the hedge fund. In any case, Citadel, who is, obviously that's a firm that's sort of run by Ken Griffins and, the billionaire hedge fund Chicago guy. Citadel has a strong history, a well-known history on the street of just having high turnover, right? And sort of like being a sort of like, you're either in it to win it at Citadel. If you're not, then sayonara, you don't need to be here. And so I wouldn't be surprised if like a lot of this memo was influenced by LJ Brock and this maybe Citadel-like mindset. But that is total speculation. Historically, Coinbase, to be fair, has had great benefits, very high salaries, very impressive benefit, like fertility benefits for women at the firm. So maybe it's a mix of that. But certainly like everyone I talked to and everyone commenting on Twitter, right, they saw this and didn't believe it. We didn't believe it either at the block when we first got this anonymously. We were like, there's no way that they're just going to be giving away money to people when in fact they clearly are.
Yeah, well, it's probably one of those calculations where they feel that they'll get that it's worth it to spend the money to get a team that is 100% aligned on their mission. And do you have a sense of how many people will be taking the severance package?
No, that's a good question. I have a sense of like I said earlier, of how many people will probably be leaving. I imagine. I don't know if like everyone. Here's the
Well, actually, you
issue.
said that to me privately, so can you just say it for the show?
Oh, that's right. So like it's not clear like the parameters around which people will accept these packages. So, whether or not they'll have to sign an NDA or et cetera. So my sense of the number of people leaving is around, maybe 1 to 2 dozen, maybe upwards to like 50 people is my sense. And then of those people, those that will sort of take this package, which could include things maybe not delineated in the email, right? Because it's like, hey, we'll talk about this through
Right, with
HR, et
HR,
cetera.
yeah.
So that remains to be seen, the exact number who will take this package. But I would expect, personally, my sources described a lower number, but I think probably more than 50 would leave.
Wow, okay. Yeah, and there also was an all hands today, the day that we're recording, which is Thursday. Do you have a sense of what happened or what people at least plan to say if you don't know what actually happened?
There were a few different. I mean, obviously, it was basically to discuss some of the controversy in the that one Slack channel that I was talking about, just the sort of the vitriol and high emotions and contentious sort of discourse that was taking place, and just about like the general reaction to the blog post that went out, and like the sort of the way in which Coinbase has communicated these points have all been up for discussion during this AMA. Some people described it in many different ways. Like it's been interesting to sort of like kind of condense what I've been hearing. There are some real gritty like Wall Street types at the firm, obviously, who like just are so kind of, let's just get through this. Like why is it so emotional? Some people have described it as boring. Some people have described it as completely chaotic. Right? It really depends on your vantage point.
Mm,
But it's certainly interesting.
okay. All right. So let's also now just cover the other huge news this
Yeah,
week
the
very
other elephant.
quickly, because I saw that you tweeted about, the BitMEX news about how the owners have been charged by the CFTC and DOJ with running an illegal crypto derivatives exchange and for allowing money laundering on their platform. And you tweeted that you had just spoken on the phone with CEO and co-founder Arthur Hayes last night. What did you guys talk about? And did he seem to have any awareness this was coming?
It's a really good question. I mean, like I said before we turned the mics on, I was, finishing up a long day, and obviously it's morning time in Hong Kong when it's nighttime here in New York. And so it was a run of the mill, prep call for a podcast. I'm sure you've done a few of those. He was supposed to come on tonight in 3 hours time. And I will say, in hindsight, not to say that Arthur wasn't his usual funny self. He was gregarious. He was, charming, but his answers were shorter than any interview that I've seen him do. Like, kind of just like to the point. His communication representatives were all there, and like we were just trying to get a sense of like some of the things we would talk about on the show. And my thinking was, well, let me like ask you some questions to like see how you would answer them. So then like, just like when we came on before, you kind of asked me about my report, so you could get a sense of like maybe how to better frame your questions. And so that was like kind of the idea. And he was basically normal, but he was his usual self, to aside from maybe the fact that his question seemed a little like the opposite of me. I can ramble on and on all day. Just maybe a little bit shorter than normally. But
Mm.
that could have just been because he finished a 60-mile bike ride. I asked him, what were you doing before this? And he goes, I just finished up 60 miles biking. And so, classic Arthur, response, right? And I'm just like, okay, I'm like literally laying in bed in my pajamas. But, fair enough.
Yeah, that
Um,
is sort
but
of a
we
classic.
talked about We talked about a lot of the recent developments. Obviously, BitMEX has been, in the headlines more. They've almost become sleepy, frankly, like in the past, aside from like after the 2019 CFTC, Bloomberg article rather, that broke that the CFTC was investigating them. Like,
Mhm.
they have, they're not like FTX, right? They're not like Binance where they're launching all these products and, making crypto CoinDesk the block headlines every day. They're kind of just like, oh, I remember BitMEX from 2017 and from the Lambos parked out of Consensus. And then they rolled out KYC, right? And so they've been trying to button themselves up from everything I can tell. I don't know if you've engaged with them in the past like 6 months, but they work with Edelman now and like, are very much trying to communicate in a more, I don't know if refine's the best word, but kind of like really solidified this message. And they kind of did a restructuring of the parent company. So the original question you asked was whether or not if Arthur seemed like he had a sense of what was coming. Yes, maybe, but just looking more at a high level, like you have seen the firm kind of like taking these different steps that maybe indicate that, or do indicate that something like this was coming. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Looking back at it, I mean, I think, yeah, I sort of had a feeling like, because why would they start doing all these things after they've been in existence for 6 years,
Yeah.
So anyway, well, we will see what happens. I'm
We
sure
will
there's,
see.
yeah, a lot more to discuss on that. But we'll do it another time.
Well, maybe when if Arthur gets back on whether or not he was supposed to come on the podcast tonight, we can have you on and we could do like a co thing.
Really?
And we can talk about yogi.
For listeners, I was just telling them that Arthur and I both are really into yoga, and so that makes him quite similar to a lot of people in my normal real life, like my real life friends. But anyway, okay. Well, this has been hugely informative. Thank you so much for doing this. And
My pleasure.
yes, I would love to talk with you and Arthur. That would be great. So thanks so much for coming in Unconfirmed.
Thanks so much, Laura. Talk to you soon. Cheers.
Don't forget, next up is the weekly news recap. Stick around for This Week in Crypto after this short break. Inter-blockchain communication will be launching on Cosmos soon. Join Hackathon 5, the 2-week Cosmos virtual hackathon, where you can play with inter-blockchain communication before it is launched and be amongst the winners of a $50,000 prize pool valued in Atom. Hackathon 5, coming soon to a dev post near you this October. Visit 5.hackathon.org. That's FIVE.HACKATOM.org. Thanks for tuning in to this week's news recap. First headline: U.S. regulators file criminal charges against BitMEX owners. On Thursday, the Department of Justice charged BitMEX, one of the biggest crypto derivatives exchanges, with 2 Bank Secrecy Act violations, each of which can carry a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. The Commodities Futures Trading Commission also filed charges against BitMEX for allegedly illegally operating a cryptocurrency derivatives exchange and violating anti-money laundering regulations. Co-founder and CTO Samuel Reed was arrested in Massachusetts, while the other 2 co-founders, CEO Arthur Hayes and former Chief Strategy Officer Benjamin Delo, as well as former Head of Business Development Gregory Dwyer, are all at large. The DOJ indictment said Hayes, quote, bragged in or about July 2019 that the Seychelles was a more friendly jurisdiction for BitMEX because it costs less to bribe Seychellois authorities, just, quote, a coconut, than it would cost to bribe regulators in the United States and elsewhere. The indictment claims that BitMEX did not monitor its transactions for money laundering or sanctions violations and did not file any suspicious activity reports to the government from its launch in November 2014 until September 2020. It also alleges that until August 2020, customers could register to trade anonymously, providing only a verified email address, and that the exchange encouraged or allowed U.S. customers to access the site and trade on it. It also claims that BitMEX allowed customers located in Iran to trade on the platform in violation of U.S. sanctions. The indictment also says that In May 2018, Hayes was notified that BitMEX was being used to launder coins obtained via a cryptocurrency hack, but that Hayes and BitMEX did not implement an anti-money laundering policy in response. HDR Global, the parent company of BitMEX and one of the defendants in the CFTC lawsuit, released a statement saying, quote, "We strongly disagree with the U.S. government's heavy-handed decision to bring these charges and intend to defend the allegations vigorously. From our early days as a startup, we have always sought to comply with applicable U.S. laws, as those laws were understood at the time and based on available guidance." Next headline, third largest exchange hack, $280 million stolen from KuCoin. In the third largest exchange hack in crypto history, $280 million worth of crypto assets were stolen from the hot wallets of Singapore-based exchange KuCoin. The assets stolen include Bitcoin, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, Ether, Litecoin, Ripple, Stellar Lumens, Tron, Tether, Chainlink, Ocean, and others. The exchange maintains that its insurance fund will cover all losses, and so far $130 million of the hackers' loot has been frozen by various crypto projects. Many of the stolen coins were ERC20 tokens, and project admins have paused contracts, deployed new ones, or blocked the hacker's address to help recover coins such as Velo, Tether, Orion, Cardia Chain, Ampleforth, and others. However, these actions have raised questions about decentralization. Meanwhile, the KuCoin hack has highlighted the use of DEXs for money laundering, with the hacker liquidating tokens such as Ocean, SNX, Comp, Link, and DIA on Uniswap and Kyber to convert them to ETH. In CoinDesk, CipherTrace CEO Dave Jevons said, quote, "These platforms can be used as effectively the next generation of money laundering mixing services. If I can put my stuff into a DeFi contract, it gets mixed up with other people's money when it comes back out. Because there's no tracing and there's no KYC, it effectively is operating as an old-school crypto money laundering service." Disclosure, CipherTrace has been a sponsor of my shows. Next headline. $15 million emptied from YFI creator's latest experiment. On Monday, ambiguous retweets by Yearn creator Andre Cronje of the Eminence Finance Twitter account caused investors to pour $15 million into Eminence, which was a card gaming protocol, to farm the EMN token. Never mind that there was little information on it. The entire $15 million in Eminence was soon drained by a hacker who, according to Cronje, used, quote, "a very simple method, which was to, quote, mine a lot of EMN at the tight curve, burn the EMN for one of the other currencies, then sell the currency for EMN. However, the hacker then returned the $8 million. The incident appears to be, quote, the first significant crypto economic hack, which was posted on Twitter by Claro CTO Clement Lesage, who explained, quote, contrary to most of the hacks, the smart contracts were not broken. They worked exactly as intended, but the economics were. Cronje was criticized for teasing an unfinished protocol, but he defended himself, saying that he intends to continue deploying test contracts. He warned potential investors not to use random contracts he has deployed unless he's made an official announcement via his Medium account. He said, quote, the contracts I deployed yesterday were purely for myself to engage with. Next headline. Inside the entitled Lawless World of Tron's Justin Sun. A meticulously reported Verge article on events at BitTorrent after Tron's $140 million purchase of the peer-to-peer software gives us a close look at the controversial crypto figure, Justin Sun. Soon after the acquisition, it reports, the company's business strategy became, quote, copy Ethereum and, quote, get the pump on the coin, which meant to make Tron look good and get people to purchase the token. And that was just the beginning. Sun often acted like a spoiled brat, for instance, demanding to know who hired a driver who accidentally locked him in a car with a child safety lock on, or castigating the executive assistant who scheduled a doctor's appointment with him at the doctor's office rather than having the doctor come to him. At a company Q&A, when an employee submitted a question asking what would happen if TRX, the Tron token, went to zero, Sun said, quote, whoever asked this question, we're going to track them down. And then he threatened to, quote, kill their entire family. Additionally, an employee witnessed an altercation in which it appeared that Sun hit another staff member. On top of all that, Sun did little to control the App Store on the Tron network, leaving it open to all manner of scammers. And he was similarly laid back about pirated movies on a BitTorrent product, as well as about harassment on the company's live streaming platform. This article is a riveting read. I urge you all to check it out. Next headline. Is DeFi corrupt? A look at the Few token scandal. Last Thursday, pseudonymous writer Crypto Angel posted a lengthy screed detailing the events of the Few token, a yield farming coin that was accused of being an insider's pump and dump scheme, to highlight what Crypto Angel viewed as the, quote, unspoken agreement between DeFi insiders and the bad actors they protect. The Few token began with a gathering of 50 crypto influencers who then hyped the project, so that within minutes of the token launching, hundreds of people had already flooded its Telegram group, asking for an airdrop. Crypto Angel says, quote, this was obviously a pump and dump campaign. The post includes screenshots of people commenting that the project, quote, should really build a product, not just buy a domain and mint a token. The article is a damning examination of a space in which Crypto Angel says, quote, the way to win these token games was to make friends with the right people. Next up is an SEC roundup. The SEC has continued to enforce securities regulations with the same interpretations of the Howey test that it's been following. And it's also getting judges to back its stance. The first of these stories is judge rules KIC's KIN token violated securities law. A judge for the Southern District of New York agreed that KIC's offering of KIN was an unregistered securities offering. KIC has said it may appeal. Next, Salt Lending ordered to refund $47 million in ICO funds. The SEC and Salt Lending, which held an ICO in 2017, have settled, and Salt will have 14 days to announce its intention to refund investors. It will also register the Salt token as a security and pay a $250,000 penalty. Next, SEC issues no action letter for compliance-focused digital security exchanges. The SEC said it will not take action against exchanges that trade tokenized securities. Finally, it's time for fun bits. In a first, Ethereum fees eclipse block rewards. Larry Cermak of the block tweeted that for the first time in Ethereum's history, transaction fees have surpassed the amount that miners make from block rewards. The second graph that he tweeted in particular shows an astounding trajectory for transaction fees over the past 5 months, in a trend that Cermak posits is far from sustainable. Thanks for tuning in. To learn more about Frank and Coinbase's new policy, be sure to check out the links in the show notes of this episode. If you're a fan of Unconfirmed and want to help get the word out about the show, please rate and review us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Unconfirmed is produced by me, Laura Shin, with help from Anthony Yoon, Daniel Nuss, Bossy Baker, and the team at CLK Transcription. Thanks for listening.